And with that, we are live. Good morning, everybody. And what is commonly known for parents as the best day of the year. It's back to school day. Michael Boosley, you look like you are beaming. Nothing has changed for me. My kids just went to a new room in their daycare, but nothing changed for me over the summer either. I didn't have the headache of having to deal with filling my kids' day every single day. So I'm okay. Dan, how you holding up?
Yeah, well, they're not back to school yet. We're in the other system where they go back to school next week. So this summer was good though. I mean, we filled their days. Well, they filled their days themselves with Minecraft and lots of learning, educational Minecraft.
Right.
Not so much, but no, we had the time that I had with them this summer. We tried to spend on vacation, so it's good.
And Dad, you just got back
all I
from
can say is payback.
Well, yeah. What goes around comes around, I guess. You just returned from a pretty lengthy stay away. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where you were and what you were up to?
Yeah. We were, sorry, I'm just working on some audio stuff here, but we were in the Turks and Caicos, and yeah, it was pretty awesome. We spent almost a month down there. Thankfully, we were house sitting, because if we were renting, it would have broke me.
Devastatingly expensive.
It's very expensive. I can tell you, discovered that it's, rooms down there are about $1,000 a night for almost anything.
Holy.
Yeah. So that's really some of the places, I'll show you guys pictures offline, but of the places that I went and looked at, there's some condominiums there right in the ocean, and they rent them for like $6,000 or $8,000 a night. It's crazy. Like it's for the uber rich for sure. Groceries are about 1.5 to 2 times the cost, because we try to eat at home as much as possible. You can't go out for an appetizer and a beer for less than, usually it's like $160.
Oof.
Every bill is not less than $160, and that's in US dollars. So it really chunks up pretty darn quick. But it was a beautiful place to be.
Yeah, you suffered through that.
We suffered through it. Yeah, we had a beautiful house with our own private beach and pool, and so it was a good time to recharge. Yeah, so that's all I can tell you about it. Real estate there is very expensive, and I can tell you some of the metrics because it'll tie into what we do. Talk to a bunch of builders there that are building condominiums. They sell them. You can't buy much for under $1 million, but the stuff they were selling was about $900,000. You rent those out, and generally you make a return of about 10%. And they take, for management fees, they take about 40%. So it's really the money's all in building and managing them. So all these resort properties, but you can still make 10%, which is a reasonable return on properties. And people do that because any gain that you make down there is tax free as long as you keep it down there. Right? No tax.
No tax, yeah. Which probably means very little infrastructure.
Very little infrastructure, yeah. Mostly. So again, the landscape there is generally, the ecosystem is all resorts that were, like resort communities, and they have HOAs, and the HOA paves the roads, does all this, plants the flowers on the streets and around the streets and maintains it. There's not much to maintain. I mean, rains like heck every now and then and just washes everything away. Otherwise, yeah, not much to do. And there's wild dogs running around everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm now
with the new child.
with the rescue. No, but I actually trained a rescue while I was down there. You'll hardly believe that, but I actually trained a rescue while I was there. So I'm now the dog whisperer.
Yeah. Well, I believe that's the way it happens for anybody who doesn't want a dog. Is dogs are drawn to you.
Yeah.
So
somewhat true. Okay. Anyway, that's my report. And I'm back.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I guess with that, I mean, Michael Boosley and I were having a chat yesterday about some of the trials of getting a buyer into the market. So maybe Dan, if you wouldn't mind just recapping quickly the current housing market in Calgary, and then we can dive into further in a discussion that Michael and I had, and maybe getting some of your opinions on how to get a buyer in.
Well, that's tough. I mean, it's dire right now. I think that last year we would probably lament that everybody was going into multiple offers and you had to get them into 2 or 3 before they could actually buy something. This year, good luck finding something to buy. There's just, last year in August, there were 2,400 listings. This year in August, there were 1,685. That's on the detached side. Let me just flip over to the total here. Total listings just under 5,000 last year, just under 3,300 this year. And then there were more sales this year. There were 2,700 sales this year compared to 2,100 sales last year. So the same story, but it's like it's almost gotten worse over the summer, which I thought coming into the summer would be the opposite. I thought we'd see more listings come on, fewer sales as people are away. Yeah, but it hasn't happened.
That's what I had certainly hoped, was that things would just settle a little bit, but it just seems like for anything that's not hot garbage, it is a frenzied, difficult market to get into. And it's just I have some folks who they're buying an investment property and they're trying to their credit, they are trying to be really disciplined and not overpay for something, and even if they're going to overpay a little bit, stay within what the rents might be, or just be sensible. And the reality for us right now is that we just keep on missing because we have not yet been super competitive on an offer, because there are people who don't care what the rents are and who don't care what the return is, because they have to find somewhere to live. And all of those metrics and staying disciplined don't matter at all. And that is really it's a hard thing to compete with. Yeah. So you have to throw out conditions. You have to throw out, you have to come with a deposit check in hand. You have to almost be just like crazy. Yeah. And I know, Michael, you were telling me a couple of stories about some of the offers that you've been massaging, but
yeah, I mean, I've got buyers in the condo market, a few buyers in the condo market, a few buyers in the detached market, and some other buyers in other markets. But without getting into like specifics, I share with your surprise, Dan, like that it still has just sort of continued to ratchet up. It's not what has been historical. Like this is typically it's the seasonal sort of like either plateau or slight dip in the summer by August or whatever. Hasn't been the case. It's just kind of continued on a trajectory up. And what we're finding is, if you have been set in your ways on the market, like you kind of took a snapshot of that market in spring, you have to reset your expectations. And if you don't, you will just be losing out on deals. And if for the buyers that typically we're usually working with buyers that are looking at purchases that are 10 or 20 year holds in terms of like either they're going to live there or it's an investment, you know. And so those are situations where I think it's a little bit easier where, you know, I think to counsel them to, okay, so, you know, this house is going to go for, you know, 670 rather than 640, you know, even though the, you know, what we thought was the fair market was 640. And you have to get financing and you're competing against unconditional offers. And so you may have to actually stretch to 675 to actually win this deal. You know, especially when you're holding for 10 or 20 years, it's really loose change, you know, that incremental increase. And but it's hard to take that stance as an agent because, you know, like I think sometimes like we're accused of like, okay, like just doing everything to get a sale. But in fact, we're putting our clients' needs ahead of our own in the sense of like, well, I mean, they're really needing to get a house, you know. So what is the path of least resistance? What's the most efficient way to get from point A to B? Point B being actually getting a house that they like in the location that they like, that checks off maybe not all 12 boxes that they have, but 7 of the boxes, you know, or 8 or 9 of the boxes. So, you know, it's right now it's a bit of a tough, it's a tough market. And so having to be really, really prompt, really on the ball, you know, and still trying to like, you know, assess each house and try and understand what the motivations are for the sellers. And right now it's just the sellers are just sort of in the driver's seat right now. Anyways.
Yeah, you said a couple of things that were interesting to me. So you have buyers in the condo market. If we looked at the apartment sector, the changes there are kind of more staggering compared to last year. There's almost a 70% increase in sales and 30% decrease in active properties. So, I mean, I don't know if the math adds up to say that we have changed 100% since last year at this time, but I mean, that's a staggering change. And so I have clients that have been looking for a condo apartment for a while, and they've seen prices go up, and they're still making offers well under list. And it's, you know, it's becoming a challenge to find anything to buy. So,
well, if we looking at those same stats going back 2 years ago, for active listings, we're down by half, and the sales are in fact up by 164%. So those two things, just the impact or that change, the increase in sales and the decrease in listings, it looks like it's been about 150% and cut by half, respectively, 2 years year over year, which is the same sort of stuff we were seeing in the detached market and the townhomes, but it's just, I'm surprised, I think, seeing the actual numbers to realize that even last year when we were like, no, condos are still okay, it was happening. And maybe it just sort of flew under the radar, but it was right there. Then the stats speak to it. And
that might be the exclamation point on the housing prices that everyone's talking about, right? Like there's nothing to buy, there's nothing to rent.
Yeah.
Even in the affordable apartment side.
Yeah.
The other thing, Michael, that you said was fair market value, right? When we're trying to assess a fair market value, usually when we're trying to evaluate a fair market value, it's in the absence of 6 other competing offers. So that's a term that we use to say when you have one buyer and one seller, they're trying to negotiate a fair market price. That's what we as professionals are trying to assess. But we also have to recognize that that's this value over here, but what you might have to pay is over here because we're not in these conditions that would lend to a fair market value today. Yeah.
And maybe that's
and if sorry to interrupt, Michael, but just quickly, and if the buyer's objective is only to hold the property for 2 years, then for sure, you know, our counsel, our advice is like, you know, don't overpay right now, because it's very hard to crystal ball like what's going to happen with geopolitics in the world, oil prices, gas prices, everything in the next 2 years. You know, like it's hard to sort of assess exactly interest rate environments, all of this. But if they're holding for quite a while, I mean, you know, you do. I think it's a little bit more acceptable to sort of be able to sort of, if it's a house that checks all of the boxes, and you are going to pay $10,000 more, and you're holding it for 10 years or more. I mean, in my mind, it's just like you have to do it, because there's such few listings. Sorry, Michael. Yeah, I interrupted you.
No, I'm just going to say it does bring up something that we've touched on briefly on the live stream before, which are appraisals and financing, and the challenges that can pose, particularly when you are in that competing scenario and you have to, overpay given the circumstance.
Yeah.
And then the bank comes back in and says, I mean, in your example there, Michael, of 675, the bank comes back and says, well, no, I mean, in our eyes, this is it's 630. And then the buyer has to come up with an extra $45,000 to cover the delta between what the bank prices it at and what they actually had to buy it for. That, I mean, it has serious implications for us as agents working, but I don't know if there's another way to, outside of going to talk to the banks ourselves and saying, listen, we were competing with 7 other offers and we got it because this is the market now. That's just, if we didn't buy it, somebody else was going to at a number very close to what we purchased it for. So,
yeah, it's a tough one. Yeah, it brings to mind a couple things, if I can chime in, that, there's competing offers, how to deal with them. In British Columbia, they have now a mandatory, I think it's a 3-day conditional period. So it's mandatory on all offers, unless you're a commercial, on commercial properties, or you're a developer. So the whole point, and the challenge is, buyers can want to pay the extra 10 grand or 20 or whatever they pay over the appraised value of it, and then it doesn't appraise out. The banks don't finance it, and then the buyer's hooped. Like, what does he do? Especially if you're in a competing situation and you're writing an unconditional offer, each kind of roll the dice and try and take the chance. So in British Columbia, they've instituted a mandatory condition on all offers. And it's something we're talking about here. I don't think it's going to happen right now. We don't really have an appetite for it. But if this market continues for some time, we start to witness, buyers getting, members of the public getting hooped on deals like that, then you might see that coming into play here as well. And the other thing, Michael, you touched on, it really does, you have to be assertive. Yeah, you actually need an assertive realtor in this market to really, step up and say, yeah, look, we gotta pay 10, 20, 30, whatever more. And you've got to be very confident. You need a realtor that's got some experience and really step into the game, because otherwise you just can't be timid in this market. And you'd almost want to, like, just buy it, because I forecast this market's going to continue to go up for maybe 2 years. I mean, if it's not the perfect house, just buy it and resell it in 6 months or a year, because you'll make, you'll probably make at least your fees back and more.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the case in some, where I've sold condos to a couple of folks, and they're thinking of selling it. I mean, they sell it for 50 grand more in a short period here. They just bought it last year. So even if it's not the right product, suffer through it. And then if you find a better one, sell it, you'll make some money on the product you bought. That's one strategy. That's what I would say about that.
Well, that segues nicely, I think, into the next topic we were going to bring up, which is some aspects of governance. So, Dad, you talked about in BC, the governing bodies there have mandated the 3-day cooling off period. What we're talking about here leads into housing shortage, housing crisis. And just before we came online here, we were talking a little bit about what organized real estate could or should maybe do to, if not have an impact directly, at least provide some insight or guidance, or a structure that maybe somebody who has the ability to actually put something into place, some sort of a policy or legislation, they can use that as a guidepost. You mentioned that there was something that Krebs had put forward some time ago.
Years back, we had, probably around 2010, we had put together a task force to determine, to come up with a policy to support affordable housing in Calgary. And so it was a blank slate. We were just like, what could we do to encourage affordable housing? And the recommendation, we had a superstar committee. We had really top quality people from the chamber and from all facets, the Homeless Foundation. The result of that was one statement, and that was to make secondary suites legal in all zones, including R1, provided it was owner occupied. So it meant that in Mount Royal, if there was a widow living in Mount Royal or Briar Hill, for example, where I am, it would support or encourage aging in place. So the widow could stay there, live in their community longer, go to the same church, same, pharmacy, all that stuff, and stay there 10 years longer than she normally would, because she would be able to, rent out a suite to a student who would help her cut the lawn, shovel the walk, maybe provide some support, go to the grocery store for her, that kind of stuff. So it was a really thoughtful policy, but it did say that, you couldn't take a house, an 8-bedroom house in Mount Royal, and turn it into a boarding house. Like you'd have to live there. You might be able to rent out 7 units to 7 bedrooms to 7 students. That would fly, I guess, but it would provide additional housing. It would allow people to age in place, and it wouldn't fly in the face of the existing zoning regulations, which is a topic right now at the council. They're talking about upzoning, I guess, or downzoning, however you say it, all R1 communities. And it's concerning for a lot of residents because, they bought, given the facet that, there wouldn't be a certain amount of density in their community. Well, the city is encouraging density. We're seeing that in RCG, and I'm not so sure. I mean, my personal opinion is that it should be contextual, and I don't particularly agree that they should do a blanket rezoning. I do, see the benefit of laneway housing and things like that, but it should be all contextual. I don't agree with just, every corner you can build 8 suites on it. I think that was a mistake, and I think we'll see that going forward. Whenever you get into these situations, we tend to overreact, I think. And if you look at communities like in Europe, you got to put in policies that are enduring, that look to the future, that are take a systems approach, and they look at first order and second order and third order, impacts. Like if I do this, what happens to that? Then what is the effect of that on, the next layer of influence? Yeah. And it's a hard thing to do. It takes very thoughtful decision making. And especially when you get a council that is, when's the next election? It's coming up soon enough that it has an impact anyway on what councillors do, on the decisions that they make, because you get to a point where they're making decisions that appease the public. And so more than, taking a system approach, they're taking an approach that, just want to get reelected. So they don't want to piss anybody off, and they want to make sure that they come up with policies that are generally, acceptable to the majority of the public. So,
it feels like there are not some simple answers, to, and I agree with you, Sano. There's lots of domino effects and sort of unintended consequences that need to be thought out with all of these things. I remember back, 10 years ago, as you mentioned, when laneway houses were being talked about, and there was a huge backlash in some of the R1 communities saying, we don't want laneway houses, we don't want secondary suites and all this stuff. And I would say Nenshi was leading the charge on let's allow this, because for many of the reasons that you actually mentioned, it's sort of like allowing seniors to stay in their place, to create just additional revenue, having students live there, having family, in-laws living there, whatever, or just renting it out. And there's a big backlash, and I kind of I think that was the backlash to that, I think, was a little bit short-sighted, frankly. With that said, I agree, the pendulum sometimes swings too far. And right now, I think that people across all political spectrum, all political stripes, are clamoring, and beating the drum on housing affordability, which I think is rightfully so. But when I see for what some of the things that we're dealing with, some of the low hanging fruit is reducing the regulation and the time and the friction with respect to getting suites legalized, for example, and things like this, essentially creating additional housing units, so that they're legalized. And so, how many thousands of suites in Calgary are still illegal? They're unsafe. They're set up poorly. Some of them are not unsafe, but some of them are. And our experience with the city in the last few months has been really, really shitty, where we've got inspectors who are, it's like they're on power trips. They are, they're difficult to deal with. They're uncommunicative. They're not giving a rationale as to the decisions that they're making. They're not seeing the actual facts. So just a very quick snapshot of what I'm talking about. The city has, had this program in place for 6-7 years to legalize, basically having a grace period to legalize basement suites. And they basically said, okay, any suite that existed before 2018, you're quote unquote grandfathered in, and there are relaxations to the rules. So there's a differentiation between an existing suite and a new secondary suite. And the new rules, for any new suites that have been built after 2018, require much more stringent standards in terms of heating and a few other things, which to where you have to add a completely new ducting system, heating system to the suite, and then a completely separate one for the upstairs, which is extremely costly to add to a house, to an existing 70-year-old bungalow or whatever. And we've run into a group of us have run into a situation where they're not believing that a house that was built in 1960, a duplex, that had existing illegal suites in the basement that we're trying to legalize, they're just no, sorry, we don't believe you, because in the last iteration of this illegal suite, for the last few years, it didn't have a stove downstairs, but it has existed as an illegal suite for probably 40-50 years. And it's going to cost us probably $15,000 to $20,000 to then legalize this. So it's completely disincentivizing us actually creating a legal housing unit. And it's totally bullshit. And right now we're actually trying to appeal it. And I don't know what our chances are of doing so.
Yeah. I mean, you raised a really good point. A lot of that stuff, the administrative burden, the suites. There was it's an unfounded fear that these suites are the illegal suites, are unsafe and all that. And I know this is going to be a little controversial. I mean, they have to be safe. They have to have egress for bedrooms and all that. But on the committee that we struck back then, that was a topic that was brought up. And if you recall, there was a secondary suite, a basement suite in Parkdale. A bunch of kids got, I think there was a fire in the basement suite, and a couple of them passed because of it. And it was a big uproar. Well, the fire chief was on our committee. That was really, they were all pretty high, and it was that's an anomaly. That is not what happens typically in basement suites. It was, they're having a party, everybody was high, there was a fire, and that's what happened. It's very unfortunate. And things like that, like bedroom egress, those are important. But when they start getting into some of these other things, you're absolutely right, Michael. They get on these, I don't know, they get on these little power trips where, they're gonna make sure that if you have to have a certain clearance, it can't be an inch less than that, and it really disincents, getting these suites legalized. It makes it tough where it shouldn't.
Yeah.
Do those inspectors have the latitude to lean on the practical rather than the principle, or is it just something that they can say?
Is it a checkbox?
Yeah.
From what I understand, in talking to some of the people that have done a lot of applications for legalizing suites, basement suites, it literally is so subjective. It depends on the actual inspector or the person in the office that at the city of Calgary. And so this anecdotally, this one person who's done it, probably 30, 40 times, has a spreadsheet of names at the city, their viewpoints, what their specific personal preferences are, and so that they can navigate each file. And it's just, it's the most ridiculous situation. And, especially when the difference, as you point out, Sano, like 100%, all of the safety issues, we need to make sure that they're addressed. Egress, like exits, all of those things, just safety, like stoves not being close to a wall, all of those types of things that are really actually important. But when it comes to, I would say, like, if a furnace has existed in the house and is operational and working with ducting and fresh air, return and all this stuff, that's a kind of a secondary, like, comfort issue. Just like, whether it's like the ability to, like, be personally able to, like, precisely adjust the temperature in the basement, like separate from the upstairs. That is not a safety issue. That's a nice to have. And that's ideally what we strive to do. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to do that. We're trying to legalize it. However, right now, it's like, it just completely is a disincentive to us legalizing it. And it's like sometimes the difference between, like, having people, actually, like, having a housing unit and being on the street, or
they make you put a separate zone in your ductwork, right? That's what they're trying to make you do so that there's zoning separately.
If the city gets their way right now, we will have to spend about $15,000 to $20,000 on putting in completely separate ducting across the entire thing.
Okay, so think about this then. Like, the real issue is, people were in suites and they were freezing. Like, they didn't have adequate heat.
Yeah.
And so that was the issue. And there's a solution that the city's offered, administration at least, is to put a separate zone. They have to be zoned separately so they have control of their heat.
Yeah.
But of course, that's an expensive thing. So, I mean, if they took a different approach, make sure they just have adequate heat and maybe not, the ability to control every room. Like, there's an example where they've just taken it too far and they're disincenting suites in the Calgary city. It's crazy.
And then another thing that they've changed in the last 2 years, I believe, is up until, I think, 2021, you were able to have a sprinkler system in the mechanical room and not have to drywall around the furnace and have, like, that hard drywalled separation between the upper unit and the lower units, as well as, like, the mechanical room fully drywalled. And so they as of, I think, a year and a half ago, they got rid of that ability to put in a sprinkler system into the mechanical room. So therefore, here we're having to remove the furnace, and a furnace room and mechanical room is like there are
It's
70
challenging.
different penetrations and pipes going everywhere. Like it's just crazy. And so that has to be like pulled out, and usually they're like pretty compact. That it has to be fully drywalled and then sealed. And I just find it's just
Yeah.
it's just so overkill, and it's unnecessary.
Yeah. No, I completely agree.
Yeah, just one thought that came into my head, Michael. That's because you have a gas burning furnace, right? And the risk there is that there could be a fire and spread, I presume.
Yeah.
I wonder if going to like an electric heat pump is a solution that doesn't require then this fire rating of this room with a gas burning appliance.
That's a good point. I wonder if they differentiate though. They may not, but it's a good point.
Like perhaps, like
Because these air-to-air heat exchangers, the heat pumps they've become more and more efficient, and I've heard that people are putting those in solely as the sole heat source for some properties now. So
That's what our sister is doing right now.
right.
So
Yeah, that's what I have here.
Well, but you have a gas backup, right? Boiler backup, but like I've heard that it's accepted now that you can have just some of these new heat pumps as the sole heat source without that backup. So, anyways, maybe a potentially less expensive solution if that is a solution.
And I agree with you. It still would require all the ductwork, separate ductwork, all over, likely like just to be sort of circulating air.
Right. Yeah.
But yes, I think that's something to look into for sure.
Anyway, so a good point. The point here is that like we need to pay attention to these new bylaws that are being revised for communities on densifying R1 neighborhoods. Pay attention to that because it'll have a huge impact on some of the inner city communities, especially R1.
I was just thinking about this as we were chatting, and if we were to go up a level to what you're talking about, that is the legislative level, and to provide a link, Michael, to where you are, like I have heard, and I think it's probably fair to say that the Airbnb or the really short-term rental pool also puts a stress on just general housing for the population that has been moving and continues to move to Calgary. I wonder if there is you do need to get a business license to Airbnb your property. I wonder if they could make it just a real simple link between the two, where if you can maybe legalize your suite easier or maybe streamline the process, provided that you don't have less than a 3-month, that you don't do short-term rentals. And so if you're legalized under those conditions, you have an X beside that property, you can't apply for an Airbnb license.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that maybe helps streamline legalizing suites for people who are just trying to provide housing, and like in the landlords, you're trying to have a return on the property as well, and participate in the housing, in the real estate market, but without putting additional stress on housing for just people who are looking for a home and a place to live, by in a way excluding that property from the Airbnb or the short-term rental pool.
Michael, I think that's a potential. I mean, that might raise some other issues, but
I think maybe just if you had two pathways. I want to legalize it all the way and go, I can do Airbnb, or I want to take the expedited process and I will accept a limited use on.
Perhaps. I mean, I think that there will become a point in time where they will probably cap the amount of licenses, or be a little bit more in terms of short-term rentals. Sure. I think that's a direction that they could take, and perhaps what you mentioned is maybe that's part of the solution in terms of, it's only part of the solution if the people on the ground at the city actually are working to further the mission of the city you know, and the mission of the city being like, okay, let's really be a positive factor in improving housing affordability and availability, you know. And right now, I don't see the evidence that the people on the ground are actually wanting and actually have any willingness to do what the overall mission of the city is. So,
Michael,
if they're aligned, then great.
That's been my assertion too, and I'll go I'll go a little bit political here, but I think the issue at the city of Calgary right now is not the political leaders; it's really administration. You know, and in the upcoming election, I think you should look for a leader who can really take control of administration and make sure that they are, pursuing the mandates that that are put in front of them. Because too often, I think that the issue is the administration is run amok. So yeah, and the other thing, since I'm in that territory, I may as well do it. Our federal government has to come to grips with our immigration policy and the interest rate, and until they do that, that's what's causing the greater issue right now. High interest rates and a massive amount of immigration that they just need to slow down.
Yeah.
Dan, so what we were talking about before was that in your role on the CREB board, they have taken a step towards at least putting a team in place to offer some guidance. What do you want to just touch on that briefly, or is it?
Sure. Yeah. There's a new standing committee that's been struck in the last couple of months for government relations, and so this is focused on municipal politics primarily. And the other thing that's interesting is there's a special general meeting coming this fall. One of the topics at the special general meeting to be covered is a public director as a board member at the Calgary Real Estate Board. And so at a town hall yesterday, somebody commented that the ideal person they think as a public director is somebody that has deep ties within municipal politics. And so, there's a couple pieces there that are kind of in the works, perhaps. We can't say for sure who might come as a public director if that gets passed as a bylaw. But those are things that are kind of in the works. And if there was a former alderman or two hanging around Calgary that had deep ties, that might be in favor of affordable housing, they'd be perhaps a really great addition to the Calgary Real Estate Board and could further any initiatives that we had along those lines. So
it's a great idea. That was we put that forward at least 10 years ago, and so yeah, I'm glad to see it being revived.
And I mean, at the real estate board, it's been discussed many times, and it was something when I was on the governance committee that we had put forward, and it was turned down. It wasn't the time for it. It's something that the Calgary Real Estate Board members have to vote on and approve. So we feel the time is right now that we hope they will approve it. So
good luck with it. I think it's a good initiative.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's 11 o'clock.
I think with that we've rambled for 45 minutes. So for those of you that did tune in or that will tune in, thanks for sticking with us this long. I hope you took something away from it, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Yeah. And you know what? I'll throw this out there. If anyone's got some thoughts on how organized real estate or the municipal government could affect housing affordability, reach out. We'd love to hear your thoughts.
Leave a comment. Yeah. Sano is tied in with the regulator, and Dan is tied in with the real estate board. So not saying that anyone can do much, but we do have some lines in, and we can maybe just
come on, we can do miracles. We can do miracles.
Oh, right. Yeah. Sorry. There's that stuff too.
And if anybody is interested in checking out Real Broker, give us a shout. We're going to have a little garden party here on the 15th, and we'd love to have you come aboard and just come out and check out what we have to offer and what it's all about, and meet some of the people that are involved.
Okay. Well, with that, we'll sign off. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks.
I'm gonna go and enjoy Parent Christmas right now. as the first day of school start. Anyways,
that nap, Michael.
all right.
Let's do
Thanks for the nice discussion, guys, and have a great day. And I'll probably be talking to you guys later.
You bet.
Bye-bye.
Okay. See ya.
See ya.